Hello friends, welcome back once again to our online educational video. Friends, from the last two videos, we are discussing about antihypertensive. Just before this, I have shared the two videos related to the antihypertensive. The first video based upon the introduction of antihypertensive and the second video based upon the classification of antihypertensive has been already shared over the YouTube. You can simply refer these videos by clicking over the link that is appearing at the upper right corner of this video. You can simply click over that link and can see that video. In the last video, we classified the antihypertensive. We also got the brief introduction for the antihypertensive. In that video, we said that we are going to discuss each and every category of antihypertensive in detail. So, in order to discuss each and every category of antihypertensive, we are here to start our discussion related to each and every individual category. The first individual category that was mentioned during the classification, it was diuretics. Friends, now we are familiar with that the various changes are going to be from within our body when a person is suffering from hypertension. One of the factors is that it results into accumulation of sodium and water inside the body. So, in that case, the diuretics are found to be promising in order to decrease the reabsorption of sodium and water. So whatever the problem a person is suffering from due to the accumulation of sodium and water can be relieved with the administration of diuretics. So what should be the diuretics? It can be well understood with the simple definition of diuretics as this. So what is this? Diuretics are the agents that increase the amount of urine produced by the kidneys. This is going to be a very simple definition from which we get a clear idea that these agents are responsible for increasing the urine volume formed by the kidneys. But when we have to study the precise definition of diuretics, it can be defined as the agents which can augment the renal excretion of sodium and either chloride and bicarbonate primarily and water excretion secondarily. So I must say that diuretics do not affect primarily the absorption or reabsorption of water, but is primarily affect the reabsorption of sodium. And along with the sodium, either chloride and bicarbonates are reabsorbed. So along with sodium chloride and sodium bicarbonate, the water is simultaneously reabsorbed. So I must say that when the diuretics are administered, it is responsible for the excretion of sodium in the form of sodium chloride, sodium bicarbonate and the water. So before studying the mechanism of action and the various things related to the diuretics, we must recall the site at which the diuretics can act. The site is very clear for the action of diuretics. It is nothing but the kidney, and within the kidney these are nothing but the nephrons. So within the kidneys, as the nephrons are considered as the structural and functional unit of the kidney, the primary site or the principal site for the mechanism of action for diuretics, it is nephrons. So let us first of all understand what are the basic steps involved in the urine formation. So we are familiar with the three basic processes that are used during or that are carried out during the urine formation. The very first process, it is the glomerular filtration. When the blood is brought into the kidney and then after it is brought towards the nephron through the afferent arteriole. It enters into the Bowman's capsule. Once the afferent arteriole enters into the Bowman's capsule, it forms a network of capillaries within the Bowman's capsule known as the glomerulus. So, during the glomerular filtration, the substances starts to move from the blood system to the Bowman's capsule. This process is known as the glomerular filtration. The next process involved in the urine formation, it is tubular secretion. During the tubular secretion, substances that are not filtered by the process of glomerular filtration, which are having the high molecular size but needs to be excreted through the urinary system, can be actively secreted through the process of tubular secretion. Here they utilizes the different transport system. This different transport system is made up of the carrier molecules, and these carrier molecules are proteinous in nature. This transport system is different for the acidic drug and different for the basic drug. So the acidic drug utilizes the acidic transport system for the transport of acidic substances from blood into the renal tubules, while the another system also available for the basic drug, which is known as basic transport system for the basic drug. But when the two acidic drugs are given in a combination, there exists a competition for the occupation of acidic transport system in between the two acidic drugs. So the one which is having the much more affinity for the acidic transport system will be excreted primarily, while the accumulation of another drug takes place inside the blood. And the last important process involved in the urine formation, it is tubular reabsorption. During the tubular reabsorption, substances that are considered as vital and important for our body and that got filtered by the process of glomerular filtration are taken back into the blood circulation. The another reason for what the tubular reabsorption takes place is that the rate at which the glomerular filtrate form, it is quite high. Around 120 ml per minute of glomerular filtrate is formed, and with such a high speed, if the urine is formed, our body will get deflated with water within an hour. So in order to decrease this rate, in order to check this rate, the tubular reabsorption takes place. During the tubular reabsorption, the various vital content for our body, including water, glucose, amino acids and the sodium, reabsorb back into the blood circulation. It has been said that around 180 liters of glomerular filtrate is formed per 24 hours. But upon the completion of the tubular reabsorption, 99% of the tubular filtrate get reabsorbed back into the blood circulation through the network of capillaries surrounding the tubule, and only 1%, which is about 1.8 to 2 liters of urine, is allowed to form. So it is going to be a very vital process as far as urine formation is considered. So what does exactly takes place during the tubular reabsorption is what? The reabsorption of sodium and water. And the site at which our diuretics act, it is nothing but what? They block the reabsorption of sodium and water. The blockage of the very small fraction of the sodium and water results into significantly increase in the urinary volume. So exactly, whenever the diuretics are administered, they inhibit the reabsorption of sodium, they inhibit the reabsorption of water into the blood system. Means now the sodium is retained within the tubules, the water is retained within the tubules, and whatever it is retained within the tubules, it will be a part of urine, or it is being responsible for the formation of urine. The sodium and water will be retained within the tubules. So more and more sodium and water is retained into the renal tubules, more and more urine is going to be formed. So now I think it will be very clear for us how exactly the diuretics are going to be act. So what is this one? The diuretics are going to affect the process of tubular reabsorption for sodium and water. Now we are familiar with the mechanism of action of diuretics. Now we should move ahead towards the classification of diuretics. Friends, we have studied in detail the classification of antihypertensive, and now in detail we are going to study the classification of diuretics. Diuretics are generally divided into the 7 parts as far as it is considered as the easy for our discussion. So the very first category of the diuretics is known as the loop diuretics, or also called as the high saline diuretics. They are having the two subcategories, sulfamyl derivatives. The examples include furosemide, bumetanide and toracemide, while the another category includes phenoxyacetic acid derivatives. Example includes ethylenic acid. Among these, furosemide is widely used in the market, while the ethylenic acid has a seldom use. The second class of the diuretics include benzothiazines. These benzothiazines are commonly known as thiazides. The examples include chlorothiazide, hydrochlorothiazide, benzothiazide, cyclothiazide, polythiazide, hydroflumethiazide, and bendroflumethiazides. The next category include the thiazide-like and related heterocyclics. These drugs are said thiazide-like just because of what? Their chemical structure do not resemble thiazides, means they are not benzothiazines, but their mechanism of action is similar to the thiazides, and that's why they are put into the separate category, that is thiazide-like. In several books, these drugs are also put under the category thiazides. But now we have put the another category, the thiazide likes, and the examples include chlorthalidone, metolazone, zipamide, indapamide, and clopamide. Let us get introduced to the next category. The important category is known as the carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. The prototype drug belonging to this category is acetazolamide. The fifth category of the diuretics includes potassium sparing diuretics. It has a further subcategories as aldosterone antagonist and the inhibitors of renal epithelial sodium channel. Spironolactone and eplerenone belongs to the category aldosterone antagonist, while triamterene and amiloride belongs to a category known as inhibitors of renal epithelial sodium channel. The next category here comes osmotic diuretics, and the examples include mannitol, isosorbide and glycerol. While the last category, which is being known as xanthines, the unique example belonging to this category is theophylline. And friends, as far as this today's video is considered, we are going to discuss the very first two categories of diuretics. That is nothing but what? The loop diuretics and the thiazide diuretics in detail. Definitely we will prepare the separate videos for the detailed explanation related to the each and every category. So stay tuned and do not forget to subscribe the channel so that whenever the video is posted, you will become aware about that, and you will not miss the any video related to the our series of lectures. So friends, now we got introduced to the various types of diuretics. We got the classification of diuretics. Now this is the diagram or the image we are familiar with. It is of nephron. Now what should we take from this image? So this image will be helpful for us to understand where does the exactly reabsorption of sodium and water takes place, and how much of the sodium and water is absorbed from the different portions of the nephron. I think each one of us must be familiar with the various parts of the nephron. This is known as a glomerular capsule, that is Bowman's capsule, which continues into PCT, that is proximal convoluted tubule. PCT continues into the loop of Henle. The first part of the loop of Henle is known as a descending loop of Henle, while it continues into the hairpin like structure, and it continues into in upward direction known as the thick ascending loop. The thick ascending loop then after continues into distal convoluted tubules, and this distal convoluted tubules opens into the collecting ducts. So now what should we take from this image is what the reabsorption of sodium, chloride and water primarily takes place through the PCT. As we move to the next part of the nephron, we study here the reabsorption of water takes place, and the next one through the descending limb, the most of the 25% of the reabsorption takes place. So our loop diuretics are there, which are going to primarily act towards the thick ascending loop of the loop of Henle. The next one, as we move towards the distal convoluted tubules, the 10% of the reabsorption of sodium takes place through the distal convoluted tubules, and it is under the control of antidiuretic hormone. The permeability of distal convoluted tubule, it is under the control of antidiuretic hormone. As we move to the next part of the nephron, it is the collecting duct, and towards the collecting duct, the specific type of pump are found to be present. This specific type of pump are given a name sodium hydrogen pump or sodium potassium pump. So be remember these two pumps, sodium potassium pump and the sodium hydrogen pump. And as we say that these are the pump means they require the energy, and the energy to these pumps are given in the form of ATPs by the process of glycolysis. So as the glycolysis takes place, the energy is formed and these pumps are energy dependent. And as these are known as the pump means they act in a reverse direction, means they are being responsible for transport of substances from the level of lower concentration to the higher concentration. Simply I must say that this sodium potassium pump is responsible for the movement of sodium from tubular lumen to the blood. Means sodium is carried from renal tubules into the blood, while the potassium is carried from blood into the renal tubules. So with the exchange of 3 molecules of sodium, the 2 molecules of potassium are added into the renal tubules, and these pumps, as we said, that acts over the supply of energy, and these are also under the influence of hormone known as the aldosterone. Now we can also get the idea about the principal site of action for each and every class of diuretics. It is said that the number 1 carbonic anhydrase inhibitor is having the primary site PCT. Though it has been shown that the carbonic anhydrase inhibitor is only having the primary site PCT, but each and every diuretic may act on more than one site of action. For example, carbonic anhydrase inhibitor, while acting over the PCT, it also acts over the DCT. So whenever we will discuss in detail about each and every category, we will also discuss about the site of action where these specific diuretics act. But it gives us a general idea about where exactly a particular kind or the particular class of the diuretics acts. So for example, the second type of the diuretics here given a name osmotic diuretics, it also primarily acts over the PCT. The number 3 are the loop diuretics acts over the thick ascending loop of the loop of Henle. Thiazides acts on the distal convoluted tubules primarily. And number 5 and number 6, potassium sparing and aldosterone antagonist acts towards the collecting duct, and they primarily target the sodium potassium or sodium hydrogen pump. So let us move to the next part of our discussion, and that is nothing but what? The very first category of diuretics, loop diuretics or high saline diuretics. Now we are familiar with the examples of loop diuretics. Among the loop diuretics, furosemide is considered as a prototype drug. Prototype drug is a kind of drug which represents a particular class or the particular category of the drugs. So whenever we said furosemide is a prototype drug of the loop diuretics, if we study the properties of furosemide, it is considered that most of the properties of furosemide are similar to the remaining drug, or the properties of the remaining drugs are similar to that of the prototype drug. The major site of action, as we discussed earlier, for the loop diuretics is ascending loop of Henle, but it also acts towards the PCT and DCT. As the loop diuretics acts toward the PCT, DCT and the loop of Henle, they are considered as a very potent diuretics. And it is a reason for what these loop diuretics are also known as high saline diuretics, means having the high power. The reason for what they are considered as a very potent is that they are retained throughout the large segments of renal tubules. And just because of what the free carboxyl group is present in their structure, it helps them to be transported into the longer segment of tubules. Carrying forward to the discussion related to the site and mode of action. So the major action of the loop diuretics is to block the reabsorption of chloride along with the minor blockage of reabsorption of sodium in PCT and DCT. So due to the blockage of reabsorption of sodium and chloride, it results into the loss of sodium, potassium and chloride through the renal tubules. Ultimately, it results into increased urine volume. Among the loop diuretics, it has been found that the only loop diuretics are effective when a person is suffering from electrolyte imbalance or acid-base imbalance and nitrogen retention, while the other diuretics are found to be ineffective in such cases. Let us go through the side effects of the loop diuretics, which are found to be important one. As we said that the primary action of the loop diuretics is the inhibition or the blockage of chloride ion reabsorption. So just because of this, the loss of chloride ion results into formation of hypochloremic alkalosis. Look here, what exactly happens when the chloride ions are lost through the renal tubules. This loss of chloride ions through the tubules is compensated by the reabsorption of bicarbonates, and we know very well when the reabsorption of bicarbonate takes place, it results into the alkalosis. And now due to the loss of chloride, this alkalosis is developed. It is known as hypochloremic alkalosis. And along with the chloride ion, potassium ions are also found to be lost, and it is the reason for what it results into hypokalemia. So this hypokalemia may result into the fatal effect in patients who are on digoxin therapy or suffering from the cardiac failure and are on the digoxin therapy, resulting into digoxin intoxication or cardiac collapse. It is a reason for what those patients are on the digitalis therapy or the those persons are suffering from the cirrhosis problem, they should be given potassium supplement or the potassium sparing diuretics when the diuretics are considered to be important as a part of their therapy. So it is the reason for what we are continuously underlying the sentence. Dear friends, it has been found that when the loop diuretics are given, when the thiazide diuretics are given, it results into reduction in uric acid secretion. The reason for this is that there exists a competition for the tubular secretion in between these diuretics and the uric acid. As we discussed earlier that there exists the different transport system for the tubular secretion for acidic drug and the basic drug. And as far as our loop diuretics, thiazide diuretics are considered, these are the acidic drug. And being acidic drug, they competes with the uric acid for the secretion. And as the loop diuretics and the thiazide diuretics are having much more affinity for the acid transport system, they get excreted primarily, resulting into accumulation of uric acid back into the blood. So the accumulation of uric acid back into the blood is known as a hyperuricemia, which may worsen the conditions of gout. And gout we are familiar with what it is characterized by the hyperuricemia. And due to the hyperuricemia in gout, it results into the deposition of uric acid crystals into the joints, which may be characterized by the severe joint pain. The another side effects may include azotemia. Azotemia, it is a condition which results into increase in the serum creatinine level, blood urea nitrogen and serum uric acid level. It also results into hyperuricemia, and how it results into hyperuricemia we just discussed. And another one, it also causes hyperglycemia. The kind of hyperglycemia produced by the loop diuretics or the thiazide diuretics is found to be reversible. Means upon the withdrawal of loop diuretics or thiazide diuretics, the symptoms of hyperglycemia are reversed. The most important side effect of the loop diuretics is what they produces the ototoxic effects. These ototoxic effects are characterized by tinnitus. Tinnitus is nothing but a formation of sound within an ear. It may result into hearing impairment and rarely deafness can occur. If it is given in the higher doses, toxic doses, the deafness can occur. A granulocytosis and a thrombocytopenia have been also reported. A granulocytosis is characterized by the deficiency of granulocytes in the blood, including neutrophils, acidophils, and basophils, while thrombocytopenia is characterized by decreased platelet count. And the most important thing that we should remember being a pharmacist and being the paramedical staff is that we should not administer the loop diuretics along with the aminoglycoside antibiotics. Because of what? The risk of ototoxicity increases when these two categories of drugs are given in a combination. The aminoglycoside antibiotic itself are found to be produce ototoxic effect, and if the loop diuretics and aminoglycoside antibiotics are given in combination, the risk of ototoxicity is found to be increased. Our discussion related to the loop diuretics is now over. Let us move to the next category of diuretics, that is benzodiazepides. The examples we are familiar with: chlorothiazide, hydrochlorothiazide, and many more. Among these, chlorothiazide is found to be prototype drug of this class. These drugs are generally found chemically related to the sulfonamides. They also possess some carbonic anhydrase inhibiting activity. Most of these diuretics are derived from benzothiazines, and it is the reason for what they are known as thiazides. But the certain thiazide-like diuretics chlorthalidone, metolazone, zipamide, indapamide differ in chemical structure, means they are not benzothiazines but they have the action similar to the thiazides, and relatively they are having the longer duration of action. The reason for what they are having the longer duration of action is that they are found to be highly protein bound as compared to thiazide diuretics. Let us discuss site and mode of action. The benzothiazides or the thiazides are found to be act on the very first part of the distal tubule and possibly on the proximal tubule. They have variable onset and duration of action, and the mechanism of action is not different than that of the loop diuretics, and it is nothing but what it is responsible for the blockage of sodium, potassium, chloride and water. So due to the blockage of sodium, potassium, chloride and water, it results into the loss of potassium. As far as the another mechanism of action is considered, it is responsible for the inhibition of glycolysis, and glycolysis is the process in which the metabolism of carbohydrate takes place to form the energy along with carbon dioxide and water as a metabolic waste product. This energy is generally required from the sodium potassium ATPase pump and the sodium hydrogen ATPase pump. So thereby they decreases the energy supply to these pumps and is being responsible for the blockage of reabsorption of sodium and water. But just because of the inhibition of glycolysis, it results into one of the side effects, and it is nothing but what it results into increased blood glucose level. Just because of what inhibition of glycolysis, the glucose doesn't get metabolized into carbon dioxide and water and energy is not formed. They are also having the carbonic anhydrase inhibitor activity as we discussed earlier, and it also results into the loss of potassium. And the last that we must discuss about the thiazides, their side effects. The important side effect includes dizziness, weakness, fatigue and leg cramps. No doubt, when the person is given the thiazide diuretics, it is being responsible for the loss of sodium, chloride and water. And if the sodium, chloride and water is lost from the body, definitely it may lead to the dizziness, weakness, fatigue and leg cramps. There is no doubt about all this. It also results into hypopotassemia, as we said that along with the sodium, chloride and water, potassiums are also lost. So hypopotassemia, that is hypokalemia, is also found to be produced. Hyperuricemia, as we discussed earlier, due to the competition that exists in between the thiazide diuretics and the uric acid, may aggravate the condition or may worsen the conditions of gout. It also aggravates the diabetes mellitus. So far what we said, these diuretics are responsible for the inhibition of glycolysis and may aggravate the conditions of diabetes mellitus. Hypercalcemia is rarely seen. Overall, the thiazide diuretics are considered as non-toxic and have a wide margin of safety. So thank you very much friends. I think this video is beneficial for you. So friends, thank you very much for watching this video. I think this video may be beneficial for you, and very soon I will be there to prepare the videos regarding the remaining topics of antihypertensive. Till then, goodbye and have a nice day.